We have Jimmy in Texas. Any and all pronouns is a theist and is wondering about what our conception of God looks like. Hey, Jimmy, you're talking with SR and Seth Andrews. Did we get that right? You're just kind of interested in what our understanding of God is?
That sounds about right, Secular Rarity.
Yeah. I'll shout kind of mine first, and I'll let Seth explain how he views it. But for me, like, because I'm no longer in the state of accepting this proposition of a God, right? I'm always in the boat of saying I don't actually have a conception of God that I stick with on a regular basis because I'm not the believer. I just tend to graft onto whoever I'm talking to and what their conception of God is. And I'm comfortable with doing that because basically I'm just trying to play your game with all your equipment. You know, you said, "Hey, we're going to play baseball." I said, "Great, let's play baseball." And then if you ask me like, "Well, how do you play baseball?" I'd be like, well, it's kind of your job to tell me. You're the one that brought the game. From that, though, I do take that stance, which is a little bit harder in terms of atheism, of saying that not only do I lack a belief in a deity, but every conception of God that I have ever come across, I believe does not exist because it fails in some capacity, either being logically incoherent or just not providing enough demonstration to actually accept the premise to begin with. So basically, I don't really have one. I'm comfortable with whatever definition is given to me when I'm having a conversation with someone who does believe it. Seth, what would you say on that? Are you totally the opposite direction? Do you have a particular vision of God in your mind?
Well, my default is probably going to be, the Christian God because I spent 30 years in the faith. So when someone says God, I usually sort of jump into Christianity as a reflex. These days, when I think of God, I really think of Monty Python. How God was always up in the clouds going, and then occasionally a big foot comes down and smashes smashes people and wreaks havoc and causes calamity, because that's essentially what God's calling card would have been anyway. On a more serious note, I am with you. This idea certainly of any benevolent, involved, personal God. All you have to do is take a cursory look in any direction for 3 seconds, and you realize this is crazy. It makes no sense. It completely falls apart. Beyond that, when people, and you'll see people drifting out of fundamentalism, begin to lean into the deistic watchmaker first cause kind of God. Something is out there that set it all in motion. And I think to myself, well, for all practical purposes, that God doesn't exist for us either, because that God is not interested in us, in intervention, in preventing child cancer or tsunamis or any of those types of things, or fixing the bad quote unquote design or the flaws in the design, or the damage done to the design. This is an impersonal other thing, whatever it is, out in the outer membrane of the cosmos. Doesn't care about me. For all practical purposes, that God doesn't exist, and I just don't care. So if I've got to put my finger on one, it's going to be the Christian God or the Monty Python God, just because it amuses me.
Monty Python God, definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
But yeah,
Mm,
Jimmy, what do you
mm.
think on all that? What problems do you have with what we said?
All right. Well, it sounds like you both have a general agreement with each other. And so, what I was going to ask, since you guys, have a you share some of your views on this topic, Secular already said that it's kind of like a baseball game. He's playing, bat with a theist. Then, if you've played against so many theists, then I guess my next question would be, out of all the theists you've played baseball with, which is the understanding of God that was the most profound to you? I'm asking for your I guess your deepest understanding of the divine.
Yeah, that's
Well, if I may, if I have a deep understanding of the divine, I'm not going to get it because somebody gave me a story. Like, of all the people I've encountered in the game of life, this person was the most convincing. I mean, that's still an anecdote. It's a story that anybody could tell. That's not how we determine what is true and what is not. And I'll tell you something else. If a personal, involved, omnibenevolent, omni-God wanted me to believe in him, her, it, this would be settled, right? I've had someone ask, what would it take for you to believe in God? And the great answer that I like to use these days is I'm not even sure, but I'll tell you this, I don't have to know because an omnibenevolent, omniscient, all powerful God would already know exactly what it would take to convince me. And he would have already done it. And I'm not going to take somebody else's word for it. This is an experience. This is a test that I'm going to have to be involved in myself, and that deity will have to pass that test far beyond the anecdotes in this world.
Yeah, totally agree. And Jimmy, when I was a Christian, I didn't engage in these conversations. And one reason I never engaged in these conversations very much was actually the same reason that I never fell into like young Earth creationism. So somebody would come up and they would say, "Oh man, it's crazy how wrong they are on radiometric dating." I mean, that's not true. We're pretty darn accurate, but that's what they'd tell me. And they'd say the fact that we're so wrong on that actually proves God's real. And my response would always be, wow, you're limiting your God so much. Are you telling me God couldn't do it like this? I don't know why you would say otherwise. God is the biggest, the best, the goodest around. So like God could do whatever God wanted to do. That kind of presuppositional understanding was the same thing that kept me from ever even having a conversation with somebody about like, hey, yeah, but why do you believe that? Like, do you have good reason to believe that? Because if somebody came up to me and said, there are these contradictory statements in a Bible that's supposed to come from this divine essence, my response would just be, you don't understand that God is just better than everything. The problem with that argument is that there's no justification. There's no reason to accept that to begin with. If you accept that understanding of a deity, though, you can just move past every argument out there because none of them actually end up sticking to you because your answer is always just, yeah, but my thing's better. And you don't ever provide any reasons to accept that. So again, like that was where my head was for a long time. And so whenever I hear a lot of religious people getting into these really deep conversations about proof this and evolution that and whatever, it's just strange to me because so many of the times it just seems like what they're actually saying at the end of the end of the day is that their God is weak. Their God just really is not capable of doing all of these things that they say their God is capable of. And so these things have to be false. But again, we know they're not. Like, we know they're not false. We still have not found Noah's Ark, man, no matter what people say. So I know we kind of shouted a bunch at you. What any of that land with you, Jimmy, or are we just totally off base here?
Well, where I've come to in my thinking on these topics is that the reason I asked the question is because I've come to the conclusion that atheists kind of exist in that their relative idea of God is naive. And so as long as you hold a naive conception of God, then of course you're not going to believe it. In other words, I guess what I was looking for was that if you can think of a God that's rational, logical, that makes sense, then obviously you wouldn't be an atheist. Right. So everything else falls under, that standard. And so every atheist, in my opinion, has, I would say, a naive conception of the divine.
Okay.
And
well, let me ask you though. I mean, let's say that a divine, omnibenevolent Father is desperate to prove himself to me and wants a personal relationship with me, his created child. Do you feel like that Father would, immediately and directly prove himself to his child?
Well, okay. Can you rephrase that question
If
a different way? Because
if
I'm not
there
sure.
is an omnibenevolent Father God who created me, his child, and wants me to have a relationship, do you feel that that Father God should and would immediately intervene and prove himself to us, the atheists, directly?
Well, I think that if you're looking for quote unquote evidence, that I don't think that the father in your vocabulary or description there is going to kind of hand it on a silver platter. I
Okay,
think
well,
it's
hang on.
up
Hold
to
on.
the
I'm going to stop you
individual
right there.
to.
I'm going to stop you right there. A human parent wants to prove their love to a child and perhaps even prove their own existence. I don't know, a bio parent shows up and says, I am your father, I am your mother. Now I am going to purposefully give you false information, misinformation, disinformation. I'm going to make things a Rubik's Cube of bizarre clues. I'm going to be mysterious. I'm going to make this as hard as possible, even though I desperately want you to know it's me. Would that make sense with a human parent? And do you think it would make sense with an omnibenevolent divine parent? To be confusing on purpose when clarity is the goal.
Well, I mean, the fact that you would call it an enigma and use a Rubik's Cube analogy, yeah, maybe along your journey you've become confused, but, I perhaps,
Okay, I'm confused.
you know,
Okay,
It's
I
your
am
fault, Seth.
confused. And my divine father says, you're confused. Allow me to intervene. We're going to have a one-on-one. I am God. I know exactly how to clear this up. I'm going to settle it. Here is the information you need. Wouldn't that be reasonable?
well, and a lot of the scripture, it says to put in spiritual works, ask and ye shall receive.
Okay,
I
and
have
that's
asked, though.
fair,
I don't
but
know.
I've
hang on,
asked.
Jimmy. Answer
Elliot
Seth's
has asked.
question. Answer what Seth just said, because the question that Seth was getting at was really important. It wasn't about whether or not we did what we're supposed to do. It was about the context of there are certain attributes of this God that Seth and I have come across in terms of people telling us that's what they believe in. They're saying the real thing up there is this type of God, and it has these attributes where God desperately wants us to know him. And so what Seth was asking was basically, why hasn't that happened for us? Why hasn't God come in and just said, like, here I am, you know? Like, what?
Why is he
Why
having
not?
you call to advocate for him? Why not eliminate the middleman and pass the salvation right on to me, the consumer?
A great point.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've ever heard the definition of faith as being receptive and open to whatever truth may and whatever form it may come in. And so, I don't know if our when
Do you
we were
use
talking
that
about
in
the
any other
definitions of
aspect
God.
of your life? Do you use that in any other aspect of your life,
Sure.
Jimmy? Let me give you an example. You go out and you buy a cute little toy rocket, and it's one of those that does actually, light, and it does actually like go up into the air. And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to go up like maybe 150 feet in the air after you light it. And then the nose is supposed to come off, and it's supposed to have a little parachute, and a little army guy comes out with it. If you light the rocket and then it doesn't happen, it just sits there, and it doesn't there's never it doesn't move, the nose cone doesn't come off or anything. Do you just turn to your friends next to you and go, wow, that was the best rocket launch I've ever seen? And you just need to be receptive to the answer coming in multiple forms. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, you're saying that in all your attempts, you've only experienced failure, in other words?
Yeah.
Well, does that mean, that you stop seeking?
That doesn't have anything to do with it. We still haven't gotten the first step. We haven't gotten past the first step. My actions don't change whether or not the certain attributes of this existence, okay? If the certain attributes of this thing that supposedly exists is it's going to try its freaking hardest to make us believe in it and follow it and accept it. And your response to that is, yeah, but like, kind of no matter what the outcome is, you just got to accept it. And so I'm pushing back and saying, dude, we don't do that anywhere. There's absolutely nothing else about life that any of us do that in. In fact, it is the specific outcome or lack thereof that we use as a determination to accept something as true or not. Like we say,
Well, I
"Hey,
guess what
this
I'm
is the
saying,
key to my car." And then like the number one thing we do to check that out is we put it in the frickin' steering column. And if it turns the car on, we go, "Yeah, that's probably right. This is probably the key to the car." As opposed to saying, "This is the key to the car. Believe me, seriously, it's the key to the car. It'll turn the car on." And then trying it, failing repeatedly, and then just going, yeah, but you got to be open to all kinds of outcomes here. It is the key to the car, even though it didn't turn it on. But does that make sense? Am I just kind of saying a bunch of
well,
nonsense? It's
I mean,
possible.
I'm trying. Yeah, no, I'm trying to get what you're saying because if it's the key to the car, it turned for me, and so I'm kind of arguing the flip side of what you're saying. That you put this attribute of
We did it wrong.
benevolence
We turned the
on
key
God.
wrong. Seth did it wrong by being a Christian radio host for a decade or so. I did it wrong by participating in my local church very, very, genuinely and lovingly. Purposefully went out of my way on a regular basis to have private conversations with God. We did it wrong, is what you're saying, and we just need to follow a certain pattern. Is that right? I mean, that's okay. I think that's pretty offensive to label it people, right?
Well,
But let's move past that and just say, okay, we did it wrong. So what's the right method? What is the right method for
I
turning
mean,
this key to turn the car on?
you kind of cut me off in the middle there. I didn't get to finish. I was going to say that I'm kind of arguing the same point that you're arguing, but kind of in the opposite direction. You're saying, here's this omnibenevolent God, and he's trying he's supposed to be trying his best to convince me. Whereas what I'm just trying to say is, you're supposed to be trying your best to
Yeah,
become
so it's my fault.
connected to find the communion,
So I did
with
something
the
wrong.
divine.
So I
think
didn't try
what
hard enough.
Elliot, I think where he's going is that you are really presumptively crawling into our skulls, our formative years, our education, our upbringing, our indoctrination, our backgrounds, the level of our beliefs, our conviction in the Christian God, our knowledge of the Bible. You're being awfully presumptuous to say that, well, you guys really, I mean, had you done it correctly and been genuinely seeking God, you would have found him. I guarantee you, there is nobody who sought a true God more than I did. Right? It wasn't fun coming out of my faith. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't a fad. It wasn't trendy. It wasn't pleasant. It was an upending of everything I held dear for a great, great many years. But I continued that journey because I was desperate to find out not what I believed by faith, but what was true. And I wanted to reject what was not true or not substantiated. And again, if a loving father wants a relationship with me, that father isn't playing tricks or mind games. There are no puzzles. It's not going that God's not going to require me to walk the balance beam all the way from point A to point B. I am their child. If they care, if they give a shit, then they are going to settle it right now, once and for all. And I'll tell you something else. They don't need Jimmy to call an atheist call in show to do the heavy lifting for them, right? I want direct contact. contact with my divine parent. No middle person giving me reasons. I shouldn't need a middle person in the first place. That's fair, isn't it?
No, I absolutely agree with you. I
Okay.
definitely don't need to call in convince anyone. I guess my point is, if you consider, let me use another analogy. Let's say it's 500 BC, and you're a practicing Buddhist. During that time, there is no option to be intellectually unconvinced by religion. These practicing Buddhists would maintain spiritual discipline by meditating in the temple, and just because they found no results from their effort, didn't mean they stopped going to the temple and stopped meditating. They would do it for 30 years, 50 years, if
Okay,
need
but
be,
I
before they find.
hang on, Jimmy. I'm sorry because I just have to stop you. I mean, we do have a bunch of super chats and some other callers I want to try to get through, but the reason I want to stop you is because I'm worried that you're going down a route, and we don't have enough time, I think, to really edify on this. But I'm worried that what you're doing is you're going down a route of fake it till you make it, which I have massive, massive problems with, and I think that is is very, very dangerous. Is
It's
very,
it's
very
almost
dangerous.
a the journey is the destination, or the
Yes,
journey is
and
part of the
and
destination.
like in the long car trip sense, like sure, but also I still want to go to Six Flags. Like that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're trying to get to the theme park.
They phrased it in the church that, faith is like a muscle and you have to flex the muscle in order to
Right.
strengthen your faith. And so, one of the reasons God is mysterious is because he wants us to go through these sort of exercises, building our faith, making us better, making us more worthy, making us more effective as ambassadors for Christ. But this, honestly, this is a dodge. This is a
Yeah.
way for God, or God claims, not to have to make sense. This is
Yeah.
a way for prayer not to have to be answered. This is the reason for prophecy not to have to be fulfilled. This is a way for religions and, honestly, structures of any kind that make specific truth claims. It's a way for them to skate, because
Mhm.
no matter what happens, we either got it wrong, we didn't have enough faith, we weren't there in our
Mhm.
journey yet, or the Lord works in mysterious ways on purpose. It is absolutely nonsensical. And I think it's sadism for any loving, benevolent
Mm.
father to purposefully confuse a child, especially with eternity in the balance.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. And Jimmy, I know again we didn't have as much time as maybe we all would have wanted. But please watch this back. Maybe we got some stuff wrong. Seth and I aren't perfect, for sure. God made us imperfect. But yeah, watch this back, give us a call back, and point out what we just completely were off on.